Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode, before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 7, Greetings from a Stuffed Lion. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. Ichigo and Kon fight a hollow together before Kon is put in a stuffed lion. Ichigo's family prepares for the anniversary of his mother's death, and a Shinigami is sent from Soul Society to investigate Rukia's long absence. Now that I have rewatched the episode, I'm going to provide my rankings for this episode and my opinions on the episode as well. On this channel, we rank on two lists. We rank mostly objective ranking, which is still has bias and judgment, but it's based on a chart with definitive values, and it's not just a number we pulled from thin air, which is why it's mostly objective. And then we also rank on the personal list, which is purely emotion/opinion based. So as always, we'll start with our mostly objective rank values, which I've highlighted those that I felt applied to this episode, both positive and negative. So starting on the positive side, we have our multi-arc supporting character introduction, which is Kon. Now, Kon technically was introduced, made his debut in the previous episode as he is the mod soul that is possessing Ichigo's body. However, he was not named at that point. He only receives his name within this episode. And with the previous episode, to be honest, I couldn't remember from previous rewatches because it has been a few years whether or not that mod soul was going to end up being Kon or whether it was a different one that gets defeated and then Kon comes in later. So because of that, I didn't have him being introduced as a character in the previous episode, but rather because he gets his name in this episode, and this is when he actually is confirmed as a continuing character, that I am placing his introduction here. Though technically we did see him first in the previous episode. Again, this one's the one I'm counting as his introduction, and that's worth 3 points. We then get a couple of pieces of world building within this episode. We learn that Urahara's shop works outside of Soul Society's laws and supervision, so it essentially is kind of like an underground, not necessarily legal shop. I mean, obviously, it's not illegal because otherwise the Shinigami wouldn't know about it, probably wouldn't use it, and it probably would have been shut down at some point. But it's not necessarily run by Soul Society, therefore, as Rukia points out to Urahara when he comes to collect his faulty merchandise back, that he's not really obligated to destroy the mod souls because he's not under Soul Society's supervision and laws. Therefore, that is how they are able to keep Kon from being destroyed. Which brings us into the second piece of world building in this particular episode, where we get the fact that mod souls need to be inserted into a body that doesn't have a soul. And it is revealed that that body doesn't necessarily have to have previously been alive. And that is how we have Kon being put inside of a stuffed lion plushie that is literally picked up from a trash pile. And then the final piece of world building is we get our first look into Soul Society, where we see basically a Shinigami playing with some children's souls. And then another Shinigami wearing a mask comes over. He sends the first Shinigami that we see sends the children off. And then we get basically the masked Shinigami sending the other unnamed Shinigami to investigate Rukia because she has been gone for too long from Soul Society and they need to investigate why and what's happening. We then get an honorable mention. We see amongst the classmates in Ichigo's class, Iryu Ishida. However, Ishida isn't technically been introduced. I'm considering this more like a teaser trailer because he's only seen in the background of students, not interacting with anybody at this point. But I wanted to honorably mention that, as then I don't have to explain when I do consider him introduced why I didn't count this one as his introduction. Continuing on, world building counts as 4 points. And then the next 4 points that we have as the positives for this episode is a multi-arc main character development, and this one has to do with Ichigo, where we learn that Ichigo's mom didn't just happen to pass away, but was actively killed by something or someone. We get him telling Rukia about his mom dying because the anniversary of her death is the next day in the anime's time. So we'll probably learn more in the next episode. We do see what's kind of like an incomplete flashback. We basically see a rainy day, Ichigo walking with his mom under umbrella, a girl by the river, Ichigo runs towards her when it looks like she's too close to the edge, and then it cuts to Ichigo's mom lying on the ground, but we don't actually get to see what happened in between, so that is why I feel like it's an incomplete flashback, more of a teaser for what's happening in the next episode. But it gives us a little more insight into Ichigo's past and that he was with his mother when his mother passed on. While we already knew that his mom was dead, this gives us more information about it and also how it may have impacted Ichigo given that he was with her at the time. Now for the negatives of the episode. So, the first negative kind of is similar to this development in that the second half of this episode is really setting up for future episodes. It's setting up for the Shinigami investigating Rukia, so obviously that's leading to something's going to happen. But it's a really brief scene right at the end of the episode, and then we also get this incomplete flashback, and we get basically the second half of the episode with the classmates commenting on how Ichigo is tense, that he's not going to be in school the next day, that the family together, like Ichigo's dad and sisters, they're planning what they're going to be bringing because they're going to visit the grave on the next day. So they're assigning roles, who's packing lunch, who's going to be carrying things, like what their game plan is for visiting the thing. So it's all leading up to the next episode. And typically when it's setting up for something, it does make you excited to see the next episode, but it's also kind of boring. And that's why it counts as a negative, but it's only a minor negative, so that is a -1 point. And then the second negative I felt in this particular episode had to do with excess exposition. Exposition obviously is very important because it gives you information about the premise, the setting, what characters are doing. However, when it gets to the point where it is repeated over and over and over again, within the same episode even, that comes to be excess. And it's kind of like, I've heard this, I've heard it, I've heard it. Please stop talking about it now because I've heard it. I've heard it. Okay? Again, it's not a big deal. Like I said, expositions typically is something that's necessary. It's just when it becomes a little bit excessive that I find it to be a negative, and that's also a -1, which brings this episode's total to a 9 out of 10. And specifically, the excess exposition that I'm talking about for this episode, as I think I forgot to mention it, is the mod soul thing. We see it in the recap of the previous episode. They tell us, oh yeah, the mod souls, they were created by the Shinigami. It was considered unethical. They were told to be destroyed. We then get Khan talking about how the students playing the game, the reason that he was angry with them was that they were going to kill a game character, and that hit home close to him because once he was created, the Shinigami then ordered the destruction of mod souls. Then we get Khan telling his history about how basically like he tells Ichigo the day after he was created, is when the order came down to destroy all the mod souls, and he had to see all of the other pills disappearing around him, and he was only lucky that he was able to mix in with the regular substitute souls, and that's how he managed to survive. But again, we get once again them telling us about how, oh, he was almost destroyed. And then Rukia again, when she's stopping Urahara from taking the pill, again points out that he's not obligated to destroy the mod soul because he doesn't work for Soul Society. And once again, they reiterate again how the mod souls were all supposed to be destroyed. So it's kind of like that's like 4 times in the same episode where they're telling us the same thing. And it's like, and that's only in the first half, really. So four times, first half, it's too much. But as mentioned, that was a 9 out of 10 episode for the objective score. So as a refresher of our mostly objective arc rankings so far, in the first place we have The Day I Became a Shinigami, second, The Shinigami's Work, third, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish, fourth, Fight to the Death, Ichigo vs. Ichigo, fifth is this episode, Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, sixth, Beat the Invisible Enemy, and in seventh is Cursed Parakeet. So now we come to the personal rankings. So briefly what happened in this episode is that basically we ended on a cliffhanger in the last episode of Ichigo stopping the mod soul from attacking kids. He manages to drive him off. Then in this episode, Rukia then explains that there's a hollow sighting, so he stops the pursuit of the mod soul, and it turns out the hollow was actually where the kids were, and Kon comes back and he protects them until Ichigo arrives. When Ichigo arrives, they then both fight this hollow that kind of looks like a centipede, and while they're arguing, they defeat it, but of course, the mod soul, which is Kon, does injure Ichigo's body, causing him to gain a shoulder wound, which I've mentioned in past episodes. This author has like a kink for shoulder wounds. There have been so many shoulder wounds. Everyone who gets injured seems to get injured on their shoulder. Rukia, when she was protecting Ichigo in like the first episode, shoulder wound. Then we had Tatsuki during the older brother's wish, younger sister's wish episode, shoulder wound. Then we had Inoue, shoulder wound. And now we have Kon in Ichigo's body, shoulder wound. I don't know why everybody gets injured on the shoulder, whether that's just easier to draw, but I want to point out lots of shoulder wounds. And I genuinely do not think that this is going to be the last shoulder wound that we see. Anyways, continuing on with that, basically, Kon is very reckless in Ichigo's body. Even as the hollow is about to disappear, he jumps basically off of the roof in order to kick the hollow, which is already disappearing, and literally almost destroys Ichigo's body because had he not caught his own body, it probably would have fallen to the ground. There's also a little bit of a comedic moment where the children keep trying to tell the teacher that there's this weird high school student that is bothering them, and the teacher continually doesn't believe them, and they end up getting evening chores for 2 days in a row because Ichigo just happens to have already left by the time the teacher comes, and she doesn't believe the students. Then, of course, after the Hollow's killed, the Mod Soul and Ichigo kind of have a bit of a heart-to-heart where the Mod Soul kind of tells its story, which I highlighted when I was doing the objective list, so I'm not going to repeat it here. But while it was saying that, it asks, shouldn't I be able to determine when I die? And I just kind of, the first thought I had when I heard that line was no, because nobody does. Like when you live, when you're born, like you're not choosing when you die in most cases. Obviously, there is a specific exception to that when you die by your own choice. But vast majority of people do not get to choose when they die. There's accidents, there's illness, there's old age, there's murder, there's so many things that can go wrong in life where you die, and no one, if you were able to choose when you die, vast majority, except for the, you know, few exceptions, would probably choose not to die. So obviously you don't get to choose when you die. I don't know why it triggered me, but I was just like, as soon as I heard that line, I was like, why would you think you get to pick when you die? Like, that's just so silly. Again, with the one glaring exception. Obviously, we get to see a little bit more of Iroha and his employees, though we don't get much development of their characters. We get a little bit more information about their shop, but they basically come in and come out. And again, that's part of them setting up for another episode and future episodes because they do play a larger part in the future. But I do find it funny when they come to collect the merchandise, Ichigo like yells at them to like stop and asks them what they're doing, who they are. And then when they respond to him, he's like shocked that they can see him. And it's like, why are you asking people questions if you don't think they can see you? It was just one of those little things like, why? But again, it's very minor. And then we also find out that the memory eraser that we had seen in previous episodes was used on his classmates, thank goodness, because the Mod Soul's behavior in the previous episode, I called it out, it was horrible. Absolutely horrible behavior. It's like, thank God his classmates do not remember that. I could not imagine showing my face in front of them had they remembered if I was Ichigo because that behavior was terrible. And then that's basically what we see for the rest of the episode. He goes back to class, everyone's forgotten. Then his school classmates notice how tense he is because they know what's happening the next day. So that's when we get our first foreshadow that something's happening. Then we go to the Kurosaki clinic where Ichigo's home, where, of course, their family is making the plans. Then we see a bedroom scene where Rukia comes out of the closet she's living in with Kon, who apparently is now living in there too. And they think maybe he's going for a picnic, but Ichigo basically tells her the next day he's not working as a Shinigami, he's getting the day off. It's his mother's death anniversary, which is where we also find out that she was killed. And then once again, it goes then into the flashbacks. Or actually, no, then this is where we get. No. Oh, I can't remember now. I think we go from that into the Shinigami in the Soul Society, in our first glimpse of Soul Society, to set up for Rukia's storyline coming up and that investigation, and then we get the flashbacks. Or so these could be reversed. I honestly can't remember which one came first. We get the incomplete flashbacks of the mother dying, all to set up for the next episode. Overall, this episode, it was boring. Like the cliffhangers at the end make me really excited for future episodes. But this one, it was a bit boring. I'm not going to pretend or lie that it wasn't. Which is why my personal ranking for this episode was only 4 out of 10. It was only as high as it was out of 4 because of the cliffhangers, because of the excitement of future episodes and them setting that up. So not a great episode overall. And then to remind you of where the personal rankings are so far, in the current arc, we have the older brother's wish and the younger sister's wish in first place. Second was beat the invisible enemy. Third was the Shinigami's work. Fourth, cursed parakeet. Fifth, the day I became a Shinigami. Sixth was today's episode, which was greetings from a stuffed lion. And then in seventh was fight to the death, Ichigo versus Ichigo, which was the previous episode. And now we come to our series ranking overall, which is where we rank each of the arcs against each other. And with the 9 out of 10 on the mostly objective list, we have 61 out of 200 for the mostly objective ranking. And then on the personal ranking side, we're adding 4 for a total of 41 out of 200. And with that, we've rewatched and ranked Bleach, Agents of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 7, Greetings from a Stuffed Lion. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.